Okay, so we're now in the process of basically an opening section to our curriculum on davening, and we're dealing with the question, the fundamental question, of course, when it comes to tefillah, of why we daven. Um, and obviously, as we discussed last week, this isn't mutually exclusive. There's a number of different reasons, as we know, why we daven, and the hope is that by kind of highlighting and differentiating between the various reasons why we daven, it adds more meaning to our understanding of tefillah, and hopefully, of course, which is the ultimate goal, that this is not just an intellectual exercise, but this is an opportunity to improve our personal tefillah on a daily basis, and use this as a way to continue to grow in our avodat Hashem. Last week, the focus that we had on davening, on why we daven, was more of, I would say, a practical discussion about how one of the reasons that we daven was simply to gain things from Hashem, to get things, to receive things from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We talked about how that is probably the most standard approach to davening, what's known as bakasha, to request, and that there were two different ways to describe or to understand the concept of davening in order to receive things from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The standard approach, as we mentioned, was that we daven, it was a situation where we believe that we are supposed to receive something. For whatever reason, we have not yet received it, and we hope that through our tefillot, we're able to change ourselves, change God's will. Again, we got a little bit of discussion about how that would work, and the idea was of a very practical, in order to hopefully convince, quote unquote, obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give us what we would like. We also noted, however, that the concept of bakasha in tefillah is not just related to that aspect, but even things, according to Chazal, even those things which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is planning on giving us anyway, even those things which are meant to come to us, as we mentioned, don't worry about it. It's all right, relax, no problem. Even those things which are meant to come to us, even those things which we are meant to receive, HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up the world in a way where those things will come to us only when we actually ask for them. And we discussed why that would be. We saw from a psychological perspective, when a person asks for something, we kind of compared it to when we give things to our children. If our children ask for it and then they get it, they tend to appreciate it much more. Whereas if somebody just comes in and they receive something, then the appreciation that they have for it might be very, very different. And therefore, things were set up in a certain way where even in our world, in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to first ask for those things, and only then will we be privileged to receive them. That was the approach we discussed last week. What we're going to now be doing is exploring a number of other approaches to the value of tefillah. And overall, this approach to tefillah is fundamentally different than the first one. Because the first one is very pragmatic. We daven to Hashem in order to receive something from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We daven to Hashem so that Hashem will give it to us. The other approaches that we're going to see have a very, very different approach. And their approach is much more about not necessarily, quote unquote, changing God's will, not necessarily the impact of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to us, but rather the impact that tefillah has on us. Where irrespective of whether or not the tefillah will lead to HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving me what I want, irrespective to whether or not the tefillah will, quote unquote, change me or change God's will, or however we want to understand that, tefillah is a process that is valuable in and of itself because of what it does for us as people and as individuals. And there are a number of different ways to frame this. The one that we're going to focus on today is that the fundamental value of tefillah is it's an opportunity to connect and to meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that experience in and of itself, irrespective of whether it causes a result that we're going to get something, that process, that experience of interacting 3 times a day with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of meeting HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of coming to a meeting place, of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that itself is a valuable process that impacts who we are and how, and is meant to impact the rest of our day. Now, this approach is hinted to in a number of different places. One of the beautiful things about as we're going to see, as we see the various approaches to tefillah, is that many of them are hinted to in different words from Sefer Bereshis, where different words are used to describe, according to Chazal, describe tefillah. And from those descriptions, we actually learn a lot about what tefillah is meant to be. So we're actually going to skip source number 1 for 1 second, and I want to start with source number 2. Source number 2 is the story of Yaakov. As Yaakov is running, we find ourselves now in Sefer. We're in Sefer Rishis now, but we're going to skip a few weeks ahead to Parsha Toldot. Yaakov is now, or sorry, this is actually Vayetze. Yaakov at the beginning of Vayetze, Yaakov is leaving Beersheba, and the Torah tells us in source number 2, Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba, Vayelech Harana. Yaakov leaves Beersheba. He's running away from his brother Esav, and he comes to Haran. And the pasuk says, Vayifga b'makom, and he met the place. Vayolen sham kiva hashemesh, and he decided to sleep there because it was sunset had come. Vayikach be'avnei hamakom vayasem rashotav, and he took from the stones of the place and he put them under his head. And this is where they have the famous story with the dream and the ladder going up to Shamayim. Says Rashi, what does vayifga b'makom mean? Rabosenu pirshu lashon tefillah. Says Rashi, quoting Chazal, the language of vayifga, and he met, and he interacted with, is a language of tefillah. As the pasuk says, the pasuk in Yirmiyah, V'al tifgabi, and don't come, and there it's reference to tefillah, V'lamanu shetikan tiken tefillat arvit. And then Rashi quotes the famous midrash, which was it was at this point that Yaakov established the tefillah of arvit. Now, without getting into the relationship with Yaakov and arvit and Mariv, we'll get to that eventually in future weeks. What we see very fundamentally here is that the language that is used by the Torah to describe tefillah is vayifga, meeting, which means that on one level, the goal and the purpose of tefillah, it is meant to be a meeting point, a point of connection, a moment when we take out of our day where we meet with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's very important, because when we think about the different things that we're trying to accomplish at tefillah, the way we describe something is very important. And so when we approach tefillah, one of the things we're supposed to be thinking about is, right now I'm taking a moment to meet with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that meeting is going to be important, irrespective of anything that may result from that meeting.
So you've got Bamakom is more geographical.
It is. No. Of course, there's no question that there's different levels to the word vayifga. Meaning, obviously, in the story itself means geographically he reached the place. And Rashi, but then the question is, why all of a sudden? Meaning, why did Chazal interpret this pasuk to mean that Yaakov Daven and established Mariv? So says Rashi, clearly they understood that the word vayifga obviously fundamentally meaning there's different levels. Yeah, vayifga makom means he came to this place and that's where he started to have his dream. And according to Chazal, it's also a language describing that he davened. Chazal learned from this pasuk that he established Mariv. So what that means is that hinted in the word vayifga, although you have the basic level, the simple level of the pasuk is he came to the place, it also must mean, if Chazal are learning from this pasuk that he established the tefillah of arvit, that fundamentally there's an aspect of tefillah that is described as vayifga, a meeting point. I'm sorry? That's true, but there's no question, that's true also, although there's no question that in the text itself it's referring to a geographical place. But yes, that's a good point, I hadn't thought about that. Vayifga makom can be understood in that way.
Pega, it actually must be neutral, because in the davening, the one we say, we pega ra. That Hashem should.
Right. No, there's different establishing. The pegara also can mean something else. Could also mean something there. Yeah, it is the same word, and we also have the language of nifga, meaning the word that word can also mean something in a derogatory term, but there's different ways to understand the word vayifga. Okay, now so that's just one. That's just meant to be a seeing it. Sometimes seeing it in the psukim and lends a certain meaning, a certain value to it. And if you go back to source number 1, we see something a little bit similar. Here we started to discuss this last week, and I was a little bit inaccurate in describing the description of it. But basically, we have now, and also in Parshat Toldot, when the imahot, when most of the shvatim are born, and one of the shvatim that is born is Naphtali, and Naphtali was born to Bilhah. Who gives the name Naphtali to her son? It's Rachel. Okay, this was the situation when Leah was having many children, and as a result, Rachel gave Bilhah. Rachel was unable to have children, and she gave Bilhah to Yaakov as a wife. As a result, Bilhah gives birth, and the second son was called Naphtali. Now, what does Naphtali mean? So Rashi quotes a couple of different interpretations. The first one that Rashi gives is Menachem ben Srok Pirshu b'machberet, or mechaberet, Samid Pitil, that the word Samid Pitil refers to some kind of a connector, a connection. Chiburim, a connection. Me'et hamakom nitchabarti im achoti lizakot bibanim. Says, what was Rachel basically saying? I have now been able to connect with my wife in that I'm also able to have children. Even though she wasn't having physical children, she was able to have children through Bilhah. Which means that fundamentally this word Naphtali, and the root of the word Naphtali, by the way, if you look at it, is the word Paleh, Pei Lamed, or Aleph, or Pei Lamed Lamed, which is also the root of the word Tefillah. So one interpretation of the word Tefillah itself, as Rashi quotes here, is this concept of connection. Which means that when we're stepping up to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is meant to be a meeting point between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's also meant to be a moment and a time of connection. Connection between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Another way of saying it is, we're going to see soon, connection between heaven and earth. We're connecting. We are here in this world, and we're connecting to something beyond that. And that's what tefillah is. That on one level, tefillah is basically about connecting us with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Regardless of what may result, whereas before, our first interpretation was all about the results that we're going to get from the tefillah, now we're seeing that tefillah is in and of itself inherently important. And what's fascinating is, as we spend some time exploring this idea, there are different ways that many of the Mefarshim try to understand this concept of connection. And each of them, and it's going to be fascinating to see from their perspective and Ashkafa approach this concept of connection. The first way of understanding this is I want to bring for you is the Nefesh HaChaim. Nefesh HaChaim was written by Rav Chaim Volozhin, and what he highlights in this concept of tefillah as a connection is he points out that many of us know, that tefillah, or many aspects of tefillah, came as a replacement for what? Korbanot. Now, what does the word korbanot come from? What was the purpose of korbanot? From the word karev. Karev, lihit karev, to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says Rav Chaim Volozhin, as we're going to see right now, the purpose of the korbanot was to connect us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in which case tefillah, which is coming in place of that, is also meant to connect us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Source number 3. V'ha'inyan. She'avodat ha'tfilah hi bimkom avodat ha'korban. The purpose, the service, the act of tefillah is meant to replace the korbanot. Ukimo she'inyan ha'korban haya laha'alot nefesh ha'behema lemala. Just like the purpose of the korban was you were to take the soul of the animal and raise it up to heaven. Now, how was that done? It was done, as he says right now, v'lachein ikar ha'kapara. How was the atonement achieved? Hayatalui bizrika hadam hu hanefesh. The way that a person achieved atonement through korbanot was you took the blood of the animal, which, as we know, the pasuk says adam hu hanefesh. The person's soul is present in their blood. And what we do, we would take the blood of the animal and we would sprinkle that on the mizbeach, and that was the main avodah that achieved atonement in the Beit HaMikdash. And the purpose, says Rav Chaim Volozhin, says Nefesh HaChaim, was to take the nefesh of this animal, again, representing on some level us, and bringing that closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'chein haktarat ha'imorim, also when we would burn the different parts of the animal, haya lekavanat ha'alaat anefesh. The purpose was to raise the soul of the animal, which was meant to replace us because we weren't going to kill ourselves, and therefore the animal was in our place. And that was a way of connecting up to heavens. Continues in Nefesh HaChaim, Kain ikar inyin ha'tfilahu. That is what tefillah is also as well. Laha'alot v'limsor ulidabek nafsho lama. Listen to the way he describes this. He uses 3 different adjectives. To raise ourselves up, to give ourselves over, and to connect, and to attach ourselves to something greater than us. Now, and then he continues and he says, why? Because even though we're not taking our blood, well, if we were going to replace the korbanot, let's take our blood. No, why don't we do that? So he points out that there's another expression of our soul besides our blood, and that is our speech. Kikoach hadibor shel adam, the speech of a person, nikra nefesh. That is also called nefesh. Where is that called nefesh? So let's stop for 1 second. And he quotes right here. If you go turn to source number 4 for a second, source number 4. And if you look to source number 4 in Sefer Bereshis, when Adam is created, the pasuk says, "Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama." God created man, dirt from the land. Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim, and he blew within him a soul, or a soul of life. Vayehi Adam lenefesh chaya, and man became a living soul. And there's a very, very famous and fundamental Perush interpretation by Onkelos, Targum Onkelos, on this pasuk. What does it mean, nefesh chaya? Onkelos says, if you look at the end of source, the second part of source number 4, v'havat ba'adam ruach mimalala. Ruach mimalala literally means a speaking spirit. What is the most basic expression of our soul? Based on this Onkelos, as Chaim Volozhin points out, it is our ability to speak. And so when we take time and we stop and we speak, and we talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is the greatest expression of our attempt to connect to Hashem. So just going back to the Nefesh HaChaim, as the ki koach hadibor shel adam nekra nefesh kemo shekatuv vayihi adam lenefesh chaya v'targum onkelos l'ruach mimalala v'chein nir'eh le'ein shebekol dibor she'adam motzi mipiv yotzei mipiv ruach vehevel halev. And he says this is something that we see anytime a person speaks. And by the way, this is important for us to think about not just when it comes to tefillah. The koach hadibor, the power of speech, the speech that we say, the things that we say. Our speech is an expression of, says of our soul. When a person speaks, he is bringing out something from within himself and expressing that in this world. And that's the power of speech. Speech is what connects us, the physical and the spiritual on some level. We're expressing the spiritual part of who we are and bringing it into the world. V'hadibor hu ikar hanefesh adam, and speech is the main part of a person's soul. Shezeh yitron ha'adam min ha'behema, because as we've spoken about before, that is the area where we are greater than animals. Animals can make noises. Animals can live. Animals can do all types of things, but they can't speak. And what makes us spiritual beings is our ability to speak. Imkein kol teva hayotzet mipi ha'adam hi koach v'chelek min nafsho. And therefore, says Rav Chaim Volozhin, every time we use our speech, we're expressing a part of our soul. We're expressing a part of who we are. Lizot, and therefore he says, be'eit omdo lehitpalel. When a person gets up to daven, lifnei kono, in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yafshit gufo me'al nafsho. What is the person trying to do? He's trying to tap into the spiritual side of who he is. And he's supposed to almost remove the physicality. When a person is davening, what are we trying to do? We're trying to take advantage and tap into the spiritual side of who we are and use that to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kainu, what does that mean? You should try to remove any extraneous thoughts that are coming due to the physical part of who we are, because we're a physical being. There's no way around that. And in tefillah, we're meant to try to remove those thoughts. That had attached, all those extraneous physical things that had attached themselves to your soul. The purpose of tefillah is to try to remove them. Avodat tefillah rak b'hanefesh v'reuta ala dilei. And therefore, what you're trying to do is make sure that during davening, all you're doing is expressing your soul. Shekodem omdo b'tefillah. Before you stand up in davening, tzarich levatel ulahasir me'alav v'machshavto kol ta'anugei haguf. Before you get up to daven, what a person should be doing is to try to take time to remove the physical part of who they are and to just tap into the spiritual side, right? Many of us are familiar with the concept, we don't do this nowadays, that the Hasidim Rishonim used to take how long before they would daven? An hour. What hour? What can you do for an hour? Okay, it takes time to get into a mindset, okay? And many of us, most of us, I don't know if any of us are able to do something like that, but even take 2 minutes. Take 5 minutes. We have 5 minutes. We come to davening 5 minutes early, rather than taking advantage of the next article we read on our phone. Sit down. Don't do anything. Don't learn something. Sit down and just say, I'm just clearing my head before davening, right? The idea of just of taking that time. And by the way, on some level, that is partially, and we're going to get to this Be'ezrat Hashem when we get to it in the future. That's partially what Psukei de Zimra is about. Meaning the first part of davening is really the warm up. Right? It's the warm-up. Where's the game? The real game is going to be Birkat Kriyat Shema and specifically Shmona Esrei, the Amida. Okay? Everything. Now, ideally, the warm-up, we should be preparing for the warm-up too, right? You stretch before you have the warm-up. Whatever it is you're going to do, you have to get ready before. But that's the part. Why do we need the warm-up? Why can't we just go straight into the Amida? Because we need to get into a certain mindset, and Chazal recognize that. And therefore the goal is that by the time we get to the Amidah, we have been able to try to push away all those things that are about the world, that are bothering us, that are stopping us from tapping into our spirituality. This is very, very difficult. There's no question about it. Meaning, I don't want to make it sound like this is simple, but it's important to understand what we're trying to do. I just want to finish this source, and then I'm happy to take the question. You almost have to try to get to a place where you become a spiritual being. And therefore, when you're talking, you're only expressing the spiritual side of who you are. And the goal, again, is so that when you're talking and you're pouring out your heart to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all of the spiritual desires, all the things you're looking for, everything you're trying to. Ulahadbika b'shoresh ha'elyon shel tevot ha'tfilah ha'omdim b'rumo shel olam. And to connect to the words and to the concepts of tefillah that are so important. It's almost as if, and this is the important part, it's almost as if tefillah, again, this is the approach of Rav Chaim Volozhin. Not everyone's going to say this, but Rav Chaim Volozhin, it's almost as if you're taking yourself out of this world. You're removing yourself from the physical world, and you're simply a spiritual being that is connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'hu mibnei aliyah lamala. Ad shegam achar hatfilah yikshe lo ma'od lafnot machshavto l'inyanei zeh olam. It's almost as if you're supposed to try to get to such a great level that when davening ends, you're still up there. You have trouble coming back into the world. Now, this is a very, very high level, but it's important to see the goal of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve this ability. This is what tefillah is meant to be. It's a time where we're basically, the way I understand this, we're cleansing ourselves. We're cleansing ourselves of everything that's happened, and we're going to see soon. There's other people say something similar in a little bit of a different language. We've been involved in this world. We've been involved in the physicality of this world, not for any bad reason. That's the metziut. That's the reality we live in. And what tefillah is meant to do is meant to be a cleansing process where we reconnect to our source, and we use that as an opportunity to remind ourselves, but in a metaphysical way, to cleanse ourselves of everything and to just try to tap into who we are as spiritual beings. Yes. Sorry, do you have a question or a comment? I thought you raised your hand. Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought you raised your hand.
If I sit and wait until I'm in the mood to daven, it could take me about 5 weeks or 10 years. But once I find personally that once I start davening, sometimes perhaps I can get to the concentration.
Great. So you're making it's a great point. Yeah, I'm going to repeat the question. The first question was whether or not there is a hineni muchan, meaning there's a saying that many people say before this. It's a Kabbalistic statement that people make before they do a mitzvah. I don't know. But again, I'm not a Kabbalist, and can't say I say hineni muchan that often. Maybe only, I think there are probably many Jews who only say hineni muchan mezuman before Sfiras HaOmer. Seder night, but also Sfiras HaOmer because we have that song, Hineni Muchan, right? But meaning, so the answer is, you can have your own Hineni Muchan and Mezuman, meaning, what's the purpose of Hineni Muchan and Mezuman? It's to get you in the proper framework. A person could sit there and be like, and I've done this before, again, I can't say I get to davening early that often, but there have been times I'm like, hey, wait, I'm 2 minutes before davening. It's not enough time to, take out a sefer and do something, so I'm just going to sit down and just kind of not even actively think about anything more than just try to remind myself that I'm about to daven and try to just calm myself before I enter. So that's one thing. The other point you're making about the fact that if you wait until you're ready, then who knows? Absolutely. But I'm not talking about sitting and waiting until we're ready. I'm talking about actively trying to get ourselves ready. And there's a difference. If what you were describing was I'm going to wait until I'm ready to daven, and I just kind of what we're describing is, number one, you're going to daven. You for sure daven. It's not like I'm only going to daven if I'm ready. You daven. You have a time when davening is. However, if we're aware of that time when davening is, and then we can try to take some time before that, even if it's just 30 seconds and a minute, to just calm ourselves down, kind of just get ourselves out of whatever we were just involved in. Then that will. By the way, that's where the Gemara has a few different comments like this. One of the comments the Gemara makes is a person should not daven when they're in the middle of learning a very intense sugya, in the middle of learning something very, very, let's say even Torah. In the middle of learning Torah, and you have the big debate, you're not supposed to just get up and daven. Why? Because your mind is all over the place from what you were just learning. And tefillah is meant to be a process by which we kind of just, we don't just jump into it. We're meant to prepare ourselves a little bit. And that's, so I understand what you're saying, and I think the point is we're trying to push ourselves. Yes?
It's sort of a related question. If one has a choice, one always does, between mumbling 5 to 10 minutes worth of words, which usually one doesn't understand, or getting into that frame of mind. Well, one might say that getting in the frame of mind might actually be more important. Okay, so you're asking an excellent question. And I would say that that's probably more of the question of the modern Hasidim than it is the older Hasidim, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. But what I mean is that what the question was, maybe a person should spend their time, rather than just, let's say, I'm using it as an example, I'm speaking for you. Rather than just say, I don't know, Psukei de Zimra,
okay, which is just words that not all of us focus on enough and spend enough time. Maybe it'd be better for us to, let's say, not say Psukim Zimra and just, again, if you're a chassid, go to the mikvah, whatever you want to say, or do things that will help me personally prepare myself. And it's an excellent question. And the reason why I mentioned it's a problem of modern chassidim is because there are many modern chassidim who, whereas the chassidim rishonim in the Gemara used to get up early. It wasn't that they would daven late; they would get up early in order to have that time before. Many chassidim now will say, okay, if I miss Zman Kriya Shema, but if I go to the mikvah and I do my learning, that's gonna, so they're less makbid about certain things, and it's a shita, it's an opinion, which is I can be less makbid about certain halachic things about it in order to be able to prepare myself properly for tefillah. And I think it's a good point. Again, when you mention, saying words that I don't understand, we have to always remember, and we'll get to this when we talk about the text of tefillah, we do believe that there's a power to the words that we're saying, especially the text that Chazal have established, even if we don't fully understand. Now, that doesn't mean we should do that. We should be striving to understand them. And how do you understand the words that you're saying? Prepare them. Study them. Do what we're doing right now. So again, that's what we're going to... Absolutely. So I would challenge and suggest that I think in terms of what should come first. Is it better to say Psukim Zimra if you don't understand it, or is it better to take that time? That's a halachic question. I don't feel comfortable, deciding. I think the standard approach would be you should say the words. And you should strive to come 5 minutes early every day. And if you come at 5 minutes, but if we come 5 minutes early every single day, at the end of 2 weeks, you'll have understood all of Psukim Zimra after 2 weeks. Meaning, I think the challenge should be not necessarily which is more important, but more what can we be doing in order to properly understand things better. But it is a question that many people have struggled with, and I think it's a good question.
Yes. How would Reb Chaim Volozhin address the fact that in the Amida we're asking for all sorts of physical things?
Okay, excellent. So again, that's why we mentioned before that this isn't a mutually exclusive. Tefillah has many different aspects to it. We're just understanding one approach. Does Reb Chaim, I can't speak for him. Does he also believe that part of the Amida and part of Tefillah is also about asking for things? I think everyone would agree that's part of it. Meaning, one of the challenges when you focus on one aspect is it makes it seem like that tefillah is one-dimensional. Tefillah is not one-dimensional. Tefillah is multi-dimensional, and that's what we're trying to show. Tefillah it has so many different aspects to it, and therefore you're right. There's definitely a bakasha aspect to it. Chazal established this is what we're supposed to be asking for. We'll get to so it's an excellent question, but I think it's clear that tefillah has many different aspects, and he's just highlighting one aspect that I think is fundamentally important. Yes.
So just a little off point, but why do they say if you say Ashrei twice a day that you'll be able to go to Olam Haba?
It's a good question. I don't have a meaning. I don't know. What I mean by that is that it's a classic agadic statement by Chazal, and clearly I don't know if that means. I don't think it means. Let's say it this way. I don't think it means that if a person absentmindedly says Ashrei 2 times a day and does no idea what he's saying, isn't paying attention to what he's saying, he's going to be promised Olam Haba no matter how bad he is. That's what I want to meaning. That to me is clear. I think there's a message there, whether it's the saying of Ashrei or it's understanding and internalizing the message of Ashrei and things like that what Chazal actually meant in that sense. Now, why specifically Ashrei? There's a lot. Hopefully, we're going to get to that. Where we're going to talk about Ashrei as we go. We're going to hopefully eventually get to some of the major aspects of the tefillah and be able to. But the point is, I think that clearly there's a message of Ashrei that or what Chazal are referring to, and I don't think it's just about saying the words. And that's the.
One more thing. So, of course, not only at the beginning, but the whole time during this war, it's been a very hard time. And I think if we say tefillah, we're showing that we feel that connection to Hashem, even when things are not going right.
Sure.
I think it's not just the words for me. The words do mean a lot to me, but I'm saying it was hard for me to daven at the beginning.
Understandably.
So the fact that I went to daven, saying, even though Hashem Hayam Makom, where we don't know where he is, that I kept that connection with him, saying that Hashem could do whatever he wants.
I think what you're highlighting is something that we're trying to highlight as well, which is that, again, last week we spoke about how tefillah was more of a quid pro quo of some level, where we're davening to Hashem in order to receive things. And when the problem you have with that, with just that version of tefillah is, well, what happens if God doesn't give us what we want? How do we understand that? And that's why last week we got into that whole discussion about tzaddik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo. Because if that's all that davening is, then there's a lot lacking. Even though we don't minimize that aspect, that's an important aspect of what tefillah is. We need to ask for it, and we need to daven for it, we need to plead for it, and all that is true. But what we're highlighting now is that tefillah is much more than that. Tefillah is about a connection. Tefillah is about a relationship. Tefillah is about meeting HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And once we understand that, then it no longer. Then I agree. I think what you were basically saying was, I might be angry at you, and that quid pro quo piece is not working, but we still have a connection. And I think that's what we're trying to highlight here as well.
I went through that process.
Many of us go through that process. I think many of us have gone through. Yes, last one, and then I just want to move on. Yeah.
I know that we know that in this room, everybody speaks, can read Hebrew and understand Hebrew, but a lot of people just grew up, even if they had the Hebrew and the English, you got it. There's such a big difference if you're going to say it. If you have Hebrew, it's
So,
Kodesh.
okay. So
Just saying it.
Good. So what you're raising is an important point, an important question, which we'll hopefully get to again in the future. I know I keep saying that, but Bezrat Hashem, we have a lot to cover. But yes, there's always a fundamental question, and I think what you're talking about is what happens if a person wants to daven, but they don't understand Hebrew. And the question becomes: is it better to say it in Hebrew, or is it better to say it in an English translation? And that's a halachic discussion. It's not just a hashkafic discussion. There's a halachic discussion about that. And the general approach is that I would argue, and again, I'm an ambitious person, we should try to do both. You should say it in Hebrew, and you should set up time to try to work on the Hebrew. Okay, and at the same time, you can say it in both. And again, Chazal usually understand it to be that there is a power to the Hebrew. There is a power to what has been said. We believe that even if Chazal, halachically, we say that if you say it in Hebrew, even if you don't understand it, you're still Yotze. Now, what if someone says, "But I can't connect to that"? Okay, then we say to them, if it connect, then you should say it in English. But try to be on a process where you're learning it so that you can get to saying it in Hebrew. So there's going to be a back and forth there, and it's a very, very good point. Okay, so just what we've seen here is according to the Nefesh HaChaim, according to Chaim Belashon, one of the purposes here is for us to cleanse ourselves of our physicality and connecting spiritually. In source number 5, Rav Chaim Belashon brings another aspect to tefillah, and it's a similar type of aspect, and what he basically highlights. Again, following in the theme of tefillah being developed or replacing the korbanot, he says that the following idea. Whereas in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, what was the korban? The korban was us, basically, giving something, quote unquote, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was taking something from this world and giving it up to heaven. That is also, he says, what tefillah is all about. And Rav Chaim Belashon points out that this is the opposite of limud Torah. Limud Torah is where we try to take something spiritual up in heaven and bring it into this world. What were korbanot and what is tefillah? Is we're taking something from this world and we're bringing it up to heaven. It's the exact opposite. It's the parallel to what learning is all about. Source number 5. Came bisman hazeh avodat tefillah b'mkom hakorban. Ki inyan tefillah hi mesirut nefesh la'kadosh baruch hu ki inyan korban. The purpose of tefillah is to give our soul over to Hashem like a korban was. Ki bechol teva shemotzi mipiv hu chelek me'anefesh shelo. Because every word we say is an expression of our soul. V'ikar avodat tefillah tzarich liot belev v'nefesh v'lo v'guf bilvad. And our main tefillah should be an expression of who we are. It's the spiritual side, and it's not our physical side. But then he says something even more than that. Ume'et horid Moshe oz miftacha ba'aretz v'Yisrael zachu ota udvekim ba himei imam mekor chayim mekor brachot v'hishbia biyadam. He's describing the Torah. When Moshe brought down the Torah into this world, and Am Yisrael were zochet to have it, they now attached to something which came from the heavens. It was taking something from the heavens and bringing it into this world. V'harei kashur olem al yon batachton al yedei haTorah hagvoa mikulan. And now, by doing that, we have united the spiritual and the physical, the world above us and the world above and the world below through Torah. That is what Torah does. And then he says, "Ukineged kesher zeh," and as a parallel to that relationship, shenikshiru dehainu shehoridu hakdusha la'aretz. In a parallel, just like Torah is taking something from above and bringing it into this world, tzarich lahalot midivreihem shelemata limala. We also need to respond by taking something from this world and bringing it up to that world. V'hu al yedei hakorban shemakrivim. And that was what the korban accomplished. The korban was taking something physical and giving it up to Shemayim. Now continue with the next paragraph. V'harei ata ba'avonotenu. Nowadays, in our sins, harabim avodotenu hirak tefillah bimkom zevach umincha. Now all we don't have korbanot. What do we have instead? We have tefillah. V'hadvarim omdim berumo shel olam. And these words stand up in the heights of heaven. V'chol teva uteva ole lemakom gavoa me'al gavoa makom hakorban b'mach. Very beautiful description. Every word of tefillah that we say travels up to the highest levels of Shamayim, just like the korban used to. Aval be'emet hi gavoa yoter mibinat kol adam. It's even greater than our understanding. V'hi kosheret olam hatachton be'elyon k'mor korban. And it connects the upper worlds and the lower worlds, just like the korban used to. Just skipping to the next line, 2 lines from the bottom. V'lazeh amru al gimel dvarim ha'olam omed. And that's, he says, how we understand the statement by in Pirkei Avot that the world runs on 3 things. Ratzalomar. What does it mean the world stands? He means kashur olam. He interprets olam omed, that the world stands means that there's a connection between the upper worlds and the lower worlds. Kashur olam elyon be'olam tachton. What are the 3 things? Al yedei Torah. He said Torah is one. Shemorid al yedei shefa milamala. It takes from the heavens and brings it into this world. V'al avodah. Avodah, referring to korbanot and tefillah. Shema'ale nachat ruach mitachton le'elyon. And brings it from the lower to the upper. V'achshav al yedei hatefillah. And through tefillah as well. And so what he's highlighting here is this relationship between tefillah. That tefillah is, again, it complements the act of Limud Torah. Limud Torah is where we try to bring God's word into this world, and tefillah is where we try to take our physical self and who we are and bring that up to Shamayim. Mr. Irving Bunim, who was a well-known a person in well-known important person in America in the late 1900s. So he has a very interesting parish on Pirkei Avot, and he highlights this as well in English. Source number 6, the second paragraph. He's really just summarizing Rav Chaim Volozhin, but I think his summary is very, very important. Rav Chaim Volozhin, disciple of the Vilna Gaon, points out that prayer has a transcendent function of cosmic proportions, to unite the world below with the world above. In that mysterious realm of ultimate being, which encompasses the spiritual structure of the universe, there are considerations which require a dynamic relationship between our world of appearance and the world of pure being. Torah is the channel through which movement takes place from heaven to earth. In prayer, we have the reverse movement. Human aspirations elevate the lower spheres to the upper. And so that's how tefillah complements the learning that we do by not just from top down, but also from bottom up. And the truth is that once we have this understanding that what tefillah does is it unites the physical world to the spiritual world. It unites heaven and earth. We actually can now have a better understanding, and this is pointed out by the Maharal, something we saw last week. Last week we talked about how there was a stira, contradiction in the Torah regarding the growth of the grass when the world was created. We noted how on the Chazal, the Gemara points this out. The Gemara points out that on the one hand, the Torah tells us that on day 3, if I'm not mistaken, was when the vegetation began to sprout, and yet on day 6, the Torah says that that the vegetation hadn't yet grown. Asks the Gemara, how could that be? If I thought it grew on one of the earlier days. I might be day 4. Forgive me if I'm getting my days wrong. But one of the earlier days was when the vegetation grew, and that was when we believe the grass grew. The Torah tells us, and yet on day 6 it says that it hadn't yet grown. Say Chazal, what happened was the grass grew just a tiny bit. It just came above the ground, and it was waiting for what? What was it waiting for? For rain. Now, why hadn't the rain come yet? Because God was waiting for Adam HaRishon to be in the world to ask for the rain. Again, and we saw how that proves to us that even something which is meant to come and meant to happen, God is not going to bring it until we ask for it. The Maharal points out that example is not just a coincidence. Why did God choose specifically trees and specifically grass to highlight that example, not anything else? Excellent, good, Adam Melech, but even more than that. Because again, if we understand tefillah to be an expression of connecting this world, the lower world and the upper world. And what is rain? Rain is something which comes to this world from the upper world. Look at Chiddushei Agadot in source number 7. Lefichach hayu hadishaim omdim al petach haaretz. Say Chazal, this is what the Gemara had said. The grass had basically grown a tiny bit, but had not fully grown because it was waiting for rain. And in order to rain, God wanted Adam to daven for it. Ad sheitpalel Adam v'haya mechaber ha'elyonim etachtonim. What did Adam do when he davened? He connected heaven and earth. Ki hamatar hazeh. What does rain do? Ba milemala lemata. Rain comes from above down to this world. V'davar hazeh haya al yedei Adam. Ki ha'adam hu bein ha'elyonim latachtonim. Adam, man, is the only being that is able to connect. Number one, Adam, and I think this might be what he means. He was created from both heaven and earth. Right? He's created from the dust, and yet he was breathed into with the spirit of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. V'hadam hu mechaber elyonim mitachtonim biyachad. Because we are a creature that is both physical and spiritual, we are the only beings that are able to connect heaven and earth through our limud Torah and also through our tefillah. Ulefikach hadishaim amdu al petach hakarka. That's why the grass, specifically grass, was used as the example. V'lo hayakan matar. There was no rain min ha'elyonim latachtonim. Shelo hayakan chibor elyonim v'tachtonim sheyitnu ha'elyonim hagishamim lemata ad sheha'adam shu bein ha'elyonim v'tachtonim hevi ha'matar min ha'elyonim. Says the Maharal, there was a separation between heaven and earth. God had separated heaven and earth. And therefore it couldn't rain because there wasn't a connection between heaven and earth until Adam, who was created from both heaven and earth, reinstituted a connection through tefillah. By davening, he reconnected heaven and earth, which then enabled the rain to come from heaven down to earth. Again, it's an additional point, but I think again we see the depth in some of the ideas in terms of why specifically Chazal or even the Torah chose that example. Yes. So it doesn't. It's a very good point. It doesn't say it, and you're right. Meaning it's actually interesting. Adam, nowhere do we have evidence of Adam specifically davening. Why specifically the Torah chose to keep that, as a reference in Chazal and not explicit is a good question. I don't know. Meaning there are many different parts. Right? Meaning there are so many different aspects where we see stories in Chazal of people davening, and yet it's not explicit in the Torah. And why are certain examples brought in others? I don't know. But it's a very, very. You're right. I mean, if this is such a fundamental point, it should have been. But again, I think this is a classic example of where you can get to it by just simply reading the text carefully and seeing, wait a second, grass? There was no grass. There was grass. So it's an example of where it's brought out through a careful reading and a careful analysis of the text in a very, very unique way. Okay. Continuing in this theme, and again, what I want to bring for you now is a couple of other examples of this same theme of tefillah being an expression of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and a meeting point between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and yet the way that it's discussed and the way that it's phrased brings out new understandings of it. Yes? That's true. Well, much of what we say is from the Torah. Well, obviously, there's correct. Yeah, well, yeah, correct. There's more, that's true as well. Many of it was certainly, meaning a lot of it is, but not all of it is. Obviously, most of the text that we say is not. Meaning, Psukei de Zimra is words from Tehillim and from Tanakh. But most and it was written by Anshe Knesset Hagadolah. We'll get to that when we talk about the development of the text. But it wasn't necessarily words from the Torah itself. Some are. We do quote certain ones. But okay. So if you look at source number 8, Derech Hashem, the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato, also discusses the power of tefillah as being a way for us to take ourselves out of the world that we're in, the physical world that we're in, and elevate ourselves to a higher level. I'm going to start actually from the second paragraph in source number 8, where he talks about how the reality in which we find ourselves is we need to live in the physical world. We're a spiritual being, and yet we need to live in the physical world because that is where we can accomplish. That is where we can, he talks about earning Olam Haba. That is where we can also improve the world. We need to be in this world. But being in this world and living in this world also comes with challenges. It means that we can get caught up in the physicality of this world. We can get caught up and we can lose the sense of spirituality. That's source number 8, second paragraph. Ulam kimoshe yiridazu mitztarechet lo lefi inyanei b'olam hazeh. Even though being in this world is necessary, we're not meant to get too caught up in this world, too caught up in the physicality of nature of this world. The more that we get caught up, we get complicated, we get caught up. Sibuch is complicated. The more that we get sucked into the physicality of this world, the more that we end up traveling further away from the great light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vihine, and therefore says Ramchal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did us a favor. HaKadosh Baruch Hu instituted as part of our avodah 3 times a day to reconnect. The purpose of tefillah, it was a gift, right? Think of it this way. When we talk about, whenever we're thinking, I get up to go to davening again, I have to get up early to go to davening, or I have to go to davening, my husband has to go to davening again, or I have to daven again. No, this is a gift. This is a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us to make sure that we keep a proper perspective. God created something to fix this. A person should stand up and talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Umimenu yishal kol tzarkav, and you should ask for what you need. Ve'alav yashlich yahavo, and you should throw at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning pour out your soul. This is a gift where God is giving us the opportunity to just let it all out and to just reconnect. V'yezeh reshit klali v'ikare lechol hishtadluto, and that is going to be a major aspect of your attempt in making sure that you achieve the level that you want to achieve. Ad shekasher yimshach acharav kach bishar darkei hishtadlut shehem darkei hishtadlut enoshi lo yikare sheyistabech v'yishtakeh begufaniyut v'chomriyut. Says the goal is not just to get to a point where the tefillah impacts you, but it impacts therefore the way that you interact the rest of the day. Even when you're not davening, if you're able to achieve a certain level of spiritual renewal or spiritual cleansing, then that means that then when you return now to the world and you go back to work and you go back to what you're doing, you're a different person. You're able to then face the things that you're facing. And of course, we'll discuss this in more detail, but that also makes sense why tefillah is, the 3 times is spread out, morning, afternoon, and evening. And even though nowadays we daven mincha marav, tend to daven it, the two of them very close together, that wasn't the way it was initially intended. It was meant to be the first thing you do in the morning, one of the last things you do at night, and something in the middle of the day. And the purpose was that we need that reminder. If we move to source number 9, in fact, that is actually the way that, we'll skip number 9. We're going to go to number 10. The Kuzari describes it. We've seen this Kuzari before. The Kuzari describes tefillah like food for the soul. Just like a person needs to eat every few hours, and nowadays we eat much more than we used to, right? But nowadays, right, we have 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Just like a person, and then the snack, and in Israel there's aruchat eser, and they have that, and then you also have to have the snack in the afternoon. So like, we managed to eat a lot, right? But just like every person physically needs nourishment to go from one point to the next, that's what tefillah is meant to be. Tefillah is that opportunity to basically nourish our soul. If you look at source number 10, the second underlined part, we're not going to read it all inside because of time, but the second underlined part, he says here in source number 10, Shekain tfilat ha'adam tova lenafsho, tefillah is good for the soul, kishem shehamazon toelet legufo, just like food is good for your body. V'chein birkat kol tefillah shoreh al adam ad she'at tefillah she'achareha. And just like when you eat, one of the goals is to keep yourself full until the next meal. The purpose of tefillah is to give you that spiritual energy to keep you going until the next time you daven, from one point to the next. And we skipped this part, I forgot to get to it, but by the way, when we talk about davening as a moment of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Ramchal points out that that's also why at the end of davening, at the end of Shemoneh Esrei, what do? We take 3 steps back. Because the purpose of those 3 steps, and also, by the way, the purpose of the 3 steps forward is that we're now entering, as we pointed out, the Amidah is the main part of the davening. We're now entering this zone where we're connecting, we're being mitchaber to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore we prepare by going into God's palace. We take the 3 steps back as we exit and go back into this world. What I wanted to bring for you as well, just before we finish, are a couple of other sources that I think are very, very meaningful as well. And these are more contemporary, you could say, more contemporary sources that highlight the same theme, and yet the way they describe it, I think, is very, very interesting. The first is Rav Twersky on prayer. I brought for you very quickly a nice little quote from Rav Shlomo Carlebach. Every once in a while, I feel like his quotes can be very meaningful. He has a very unique way of saying things. So if you see right before source number 9, praying means I'm standing face to face with God, and I can do anything in the world. I'm mamish connected. I'm plugged into the real electricity. He has a very unique way of saying things and just evoking certain images that I thought was powerful. But Rav Twersky, Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky, on this concept of understanding tefillah as being about connection, as being about connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, has a beautiful point he makes. Source number 11. This concept of tefillah makes comprehensible, there's a typo there, a rather cryptic statement in Talmud. How do we know that God prays? Because the prophet quotes God as saying, I will bring them to my mountain and I will gladden them in the house of my prayer. It is not the house of their prayer, but of my prayer. Ergo, says the Gemara, God prays. So says Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky, what does it mean that God prays? Does God need things, right? If tefillah is all about bakasha, requests, God doesn't need things. What does it mean God prays? In the usual sense of prayer, it is difficult to conceive of God praying. God doesn't have any needs, nor would he glorify himself. He's not going to praise himself. If, however, tefillah refers to a bonding and a relationship, if it's about chibur, if it's about connection, then God's tefillah makes perfect sense. God relates to us, and we relate to him. We bond with God, and he bonds with us. God communicates with us, and we communicate with him. Children ask their parents for many things. When these requests are appropriate, parents enjoy fulfilling them. When they are not, parents may deny the request, often to the chagrin of the children. Children may not understand why their parents refuse them what they want. They may cry and complain. We've all experienced that, I'm sure. They may even be angry and resentful. I just had it last night. I have it every day. No. They may even be angry and resentful. When they receive what they want, they may be grateful. Children may adore their parents and tell others how wonderful their parents are. Parents may have to discipline their children and, when necessary, even punish them. Parents protect their children, sometimes in ways the children cannot understand, as when they submit their infants to painful immunizations intended to protect them from dreaded diseases. All the various means of communication that occur between parents and children can likewise occur between God and man. These are the ways of tefillah, of relating. And when we relate, we bond. We bond with God when we make a request or voice a complaint. We bond with Him when we thank Him or praise Him. God bonds with us when He grants what we ask for or when He denies it. Denial of a request is no less of a form of relationship than sanctioning it. Many of us know, I'm sure, have experienced that. We might have to say no to our children, but that doesn't mean that we don't want a relationship. It doesn't mean we don't care about them. That's also part of the relationship. God bonds with us when He protects us, but also when He disciplines and when He punishes us. And therefore, even when tefillah does not result in what we want, we've still, as we've highlighted here, we've still connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We've still bonded. We've still met, had that meeting place between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a beautiful way. And of course, Rav Soloveitchik has a beautiful part, and I'm only bringing you a small part of it, where he highlights the power of tefillah. And what he calls tefillah is basically a dialogue between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Source number 12. In prayer, however, we have a dialogue, which is bilateral and reciprocal. Man climbs the mountain towards God, while he descends, figuratively, from the mountaintop. Two hands embrace, as in a handshake. Prayer, we said, is a dialogue, not a monologue. A dialogue exists when one person addresses another, even if the other is temporarily silent. Even though God might not be responding actively, explicitly to us, it doesn't mean that He's not listening. In prophecy, God speaks and man is silent. In prayer, there is the reverse situation. We have the assurance that He is a shomea tefillah. He hears our prayers even if He does not accede to our wishes. In praying, we do not seek a response to a particular request as much as we desire fellowship with God. Prayer is not a means, I would argue, I would add here, not simply, right? Sometimes it can be a way to ask, but it's not just a means of wheedling some benefit from God. Despite our prayer, v'kabel b'rachmim v'ratzon et tefilatenu, it is our persistent hope that this may be fulfilled, but it is not our primary motivation. Our sages felt that the acceptance of our prayers is beyond our understanding and governed by unknowable considerations. We do not really understand why some prayers are accepted and others rejected. Dialogue means communication, engagement, interaction. When we pray, God emerges out of His transcendence and forms a relationship with us. The infinite and the finite meet, and the vast chasm is bridged. And so again, in his very unique way, he's highlighting the very same thing that Rav Chaim Volozhin was saying, and the same thing that the Ramchal was saying. One aspect of tefillah, one major aspect of tefillah is simply communication, connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We want to have that time with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's what tefillah is all about. And by the way, what this also highlights, when I saw this piece by the Rav, it reminded me of another word that is used in the Torah to describe tefillah, that very much hides this. Exactly. Sicha. Look at source number 13, and with this we will end. The Torah describes how Yitzchak, as Rachel was on her way back, or as Rivka was on her way back, Eliezer was bringing Rivka back to meet Yitzchak for the first time. The Torah tells us, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. What was he doing at that time? Rashi quotes the famous Gemara. What was he doing? He was davening. Because the word suach, siach, conversation, is a language of tefillah. And that's what we've been highlighting today. This aspect of tefillah. Last week we talked about tefillah as being a moment, a way to achieve and receive certain things from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Today we talked about tefillah as being a way to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to connect with Him, to converse with Him. And we saw different ways of the same idea being described. Be'ezrat Hashem, next week there are a few other approaches to tefillah. And we'll finish up this introductory short little series on tefillah, and then move on to some other topics on tefillah. Wishing everyone a wonderful day.